This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post, coming to you from Nairobi, Kenya, from the Fort Hall School of Government. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you may have missed this morning, but we also take a look at some of the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 13th of August 2020, and I am Tua.
I'm JM.
And I am GK, and in case you missed the headlines, here they are. In the Star, Raila ODM purge ahead of 2022 polls. In the Daily Nation, secret card in revenue battle. And in the Standard, a crisis of leadership. I want to begin with the Star, but I also want to toss it very quickly.
Oh, very fast.
Because this is old news. We've been purging for the last few months.
Yes.
We know that ODM is trying to get its house in order. NASA is dead, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, let's toss it.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Now I want us to move to this CRA formula, which has caused this stalemate in Senate. And I want us to begin with looking at some of the facts. What do we know so far, right?
Yeah.
We know that the CRA report was first tabled in 2019.
Yeah.
The report was then rejected by counties that were to get the reductions.
Yes.
Senate had its hand at it with the finance and budget committees.
Yeah.
They've made their iterations. We are now in the 7th or 8th sort of sitting,
Yes.
trying to figure out whether it will be passed or not. Now, some have said that this is a failure on the part of leadership.
Yeah.
However, I want to propose certain things.
Yeah.
First,
Yeah.
that it should be a debate. So what you're seeing going back and forth isn't necessarily a failure.
Yeah.
Because that is what the revenue sharing formula is supposed to be about. You're supposed to debate it to see who will get what fits for everybody till you get the best compromise.
Yeah.
The other thing is that we've been seeing this debate between a populist sort of decision-making thing going on versus what is logic. And we know that some senators are proposing that the status quo prevails, i.e. the second CRA formula, the one that is currently in place, continues until the compromise is found. The most recent amendment, which is what the Daily Nation speaks of, is a third formula. Is proposed by Petronilla Were, who's a nominated senator, and she proposes that the third formula be applied in the next financial year when the revenue share for counties will be higher. And she proposes raising it to about 348 billion. Now, it is this formula that the Daily Nation says is Uhuru and Raila's sort of backup plan in case it's not passed in the form that it is now. If the amendment is passed, the gainers include Nairobi with 2.9 billion, we have Kiambu with 2.3, Nakuru 1.8, Uasin Gishu 1.6, Bungoma 1.8, among others. The losers still sort of are mainly northeastern and coastal, although they're not losing by that much. Wajir shrinks by about 732 million, Kwale by 559, Narok by 155, Mombasa by 48, among others. Tharaka Nithi 143 million. Now, this raising the revenue to 348 billion is ambitious because according to the budget policy, we are currently capped at 333 billion. Now, what is also a cause for contention is that the CRA report used a higher allocation than what the Senate is using of 316 billion. So when you're weighting it, those are the discrepancies that you're seeing being put out into the media. Now, the other thing to point out is formula number 1, formula number 2, both had 45% weighting of population. And the third revenue formula, even though it's placing its weight on population, is no different from formula 1 and 2, which I think is another misconception. Now, the CRA updated its formula to consider the 2019 census numbers. And that's what has caused sort of all this furor, with the numbers sort of being looking so different, right, from what they're used to. Now, you have the likes of Linturi and Murkomen, who are sort of trying to paint this picture that their formula is the one that's unifying Kenyans. It's the one that does not marginalize counties. But does that mean we throw our logic and our caution to the wind? No. I'm a firm believer that function should follow, money should follow function, And there's no real reason why Lamu should have an 8 times per capita spend than Nairobi does. It makes absolutely no sense. Especially when you look at the capacity and efficiency principle, your ability to absorb, your ability to develop, and to do good with the money, to show that the money is being spent on certain things. Anyway, so my big question is, where is the crisis located? And if the facts are changing, why is Senate not changing their mind?
GK, before I tell you where the crisis is located,
yes.
I hope Petronilla doesn't add fuel to the fire.
Hi.
All right, here is where the crisis is located. The cowardice of Senate is where this crisis is located. Senate is opting for popular decisions instead of bold decisions. It is a crisis of political turncoats. And we can speak to this using game theory. Now, every game has 3 elements to it. 1 is actions, 2 is actors, and 3 is payoffs. So who are the actors in this? And what are the payoffs? Now, we have a hypothesis. The actors are 2. President Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto. One is playing a simultaneous game, and the other is playing a sequential game. Now, William Ruto is playing a simultaneous game. Now, a simultaneous game does not have a time axis, as players choose their moves without being sure of what the other's payoff is. His payoff is just to disrupt the new Jubilee power matrix at the Senate. He is playing a simultaneous game because he does not understand his opponent's payoff. Now, Uhuru Kenyatta, on the other hand, is playing a sequential game. A sequential game is a game where one player chooses their action before the other chooses theirs. A player plays a game, and the result of this game will be determined as the game continues. Uhuru is playing a sequential game because he has a payoff. And his payoff is not just to have a CRA formula. His end game is BBI. Take that to the bank. His end game is how Gema benefits from a parliamentary system, and how it benefits from a parliamentary system that has proportional allocation and proportional representation at its core. Now, in other words, Uhuru is dog whistling Gema and telling them, you are being cheated. Wisen up, my friends. If you are to stay at the top, you will need a system that keeps you there. Nothing wrong with that. After all, if Kiambu alone has a GDP of $4.4 billion, half of Rwanda's GDP, and receives only 9 billion shillings a year from the exchequer, should they not be asking for more? If 5 counties in Northeastern have a combined GDP of $160 million, or if you want 16 billion shillings, and they receive 45 billion shillings from the exchequer, isn't that discrimination on Gema?
Yes.
Look, no one is saying anybody should receive less than the other, but some level of parity should be attained.
Interesting.
And so let me attempt to forecast the outcome of this debate on the revenue sharing formula at the Senate. And I'll do this based on the book Super Forecasting by the authors Philip Tetlock and Dan Gardner. And one of the cardinal rules of making accurate predictions, they say, is to break down problems into smaller units before starting to analyze them. And super forecasters, like our very own Professor Matai Ngunyi, who accurately predicted the 2013 presidential election outcome, he didn't have access to top secret information. He simply collected the data, broke it up into small bits and pieces, and then began the systematic analysis using history and using the tools of science. And when I break down this problem into its constituent parts, I discern 3 critical factors for success. The first is the peculiar nature of the issue at hand. Now, this issue is indeed peculiar and unprecedented at the Senate. It is contentious because it's a zero-sum formula which leaves some with less and others with more, and as a result it is highly divisive, and politicians have behaved completely unpredictably. Some MPs whose counties will be gaining more money have voted against the proposal to revise the formula, and as you're saying, GK, is partly because of populism. Others who have been speaking ill of Uhuru Kenyatta as ordered by the Deputy President have voted for the amendment to revise the formula because their counties will reap big time. Counties like Nandi, Kericho, Elgeyo Marakwet, all these counties are going to be reaping big time. Although Marakwet has, Mokomen did not vote for it. But number 2, the power matrix. Ideally, Uhuru and Raila ought to be on the same side on this one, but they are not. And because they are not, the newly proposed formula may not succeed. Raila feels the need to defend his traditional support base, who stand as the biggest losers in this debate. But we must remind him he is using an old map to navigate new lands. Should he seek Gema support in 2022, Gema will make him pay a huge fine for that. And third and finally is the Senate leadership. Have you ever tried to get a bunch of cats to go in the same direction, Kenyans? It is nearly impossible. And trying to herd MPs in one direction is just as difficult. And as you know, to make any bill succeed, MPs have to be whipped. Now, unfortunately, the newly inaugurated leaders in the Senate have been unable to whip up their colleagues into submission. On account of that, therefore, the chances of a win for the president are, I think, just about 50-50.
Yeah.
However, whichever way the president comes out on top, because at the end of the day, this will result in a united Gema. And a united Gema is a in direct proportion a loss for the deputy president.
Wow. This is interesting stuff. So you predict 50-50. It could go either way, but it's a win for Uhuru Kenyatta.
But ultimately, he wins the war. He may not win the battle, but he will win the war.
Yeah, and they say, I think in the Standard they point out that since 2013, Uhuru has not lost any business in the Senate, including the Security Laws Amendment, the Election Law Amendment, and Public Audit Law. So if history is anything to go by,
yes, absolutely,
maybe we even have
he'll carry the day.
Yeah, so guys, we have a 3-part criteria that we're going to use to break down the headlines. We will ask ourselves, is it topical or speculative? Is it repetitive or groundbreaking? And is it thoughtful or just plain lazy? We already trashed the Star. We're left with a crisis of leadership, but we're saying it's not leadership at the top, but crisis in the Senate.
Absolutely.
And then we have Daily Nation, secret card in revenue battle. It's not so secretive, so I'm gonna toss the Daily Nation.
We already know.
Yeah, that leaves us with the Standard giving us our winning headline. Onto the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country, where we also have a 3-part criteria. We ask ourselves, is it humorous or dry? Is it satirical or pessimistic? And is it effective or just plain lazy? I would like us to begin with the Standard.
So here we have a caricature of Mudavadi, Musalia Mudavadi on the street. And there's passers-by there with he's got no legs, and he's standing behind a box written my DVD, and and it says there, "I'm the only safe pair of hands around." And the context there is a very humorous one. Barack Muluka recently resigned as a Secretary General, but more fundamentally, this speaks to Musalia's business political model, if I could call it that, where he is constantly waiting for others to anoint him, constantly posturing as the safe pair of hands. You know what? It might actually work in 2022. I don't have a lot of confidence in it, but who knows?
So, but it looks like he has no legs to stand on.
I know, very savage.
Okay, I think let's keep Gado's cartoon. Let's move quickly to the Star, where we have system. We have caricatures of our 3 main political actors in various formations. In the first one, we have DP Ruto with Raila, and at this time, they're pointing at Kibaki and saying, he is the system. And then we have Uhuru and DP holding each other, having a great time, but this time Raila is pointing and saying, you are the system. And then now we have Raila and Uhuru Kenyatta, buddies, and this time Ruto is pointing and saying, you are the system. And Ozone is telling us this is karma for you. And I think you guys had a great conversation yesterday on the system, on the deep state, on the establishment.
Absolutely.
I love it. We can pack it.
Pack out as well.
Yes.
Coordination.
Yes.
That is Ndula, I believe. And there is a caricature of Vladimir Putin, and he's jumping over hurdles. And the caption there is, Russia policy on COVID-19 vaccine is fast and fast. And I think this is with regard to Vladimir Putin. Is it yesterday or the day before? He announced that Russia had discovered a vaccine for COVID. Good news. And they said they're going to give it to the WHO to test it. And that thing was actually tested on Vladimir Putin's daughter.
This is good PR. This is what Putin gets stuff done, right?
He gets stuff done. I mean, if Russia was fast on the moon, they might as well be fast on discovering this. I like it. Who
do we give our winning cartoon? I like Gado's, and I also like the Star, but I want to give it to the system. I think it was
I think the system.
So there we have it. The Star gives us our winning cartoon. And now for our final 4, but before we get there, please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
And now our final thought. It is inspired by a book entitled Collapse: How Societies Choose to Fail or Succeed by Jared Diamond.
Yes. So the history of humanity is littered with thriving civilizations that simply vanished. The question the author begs is, why do societies collapse and fall into ruin? And in this book, Jared Diamond breaks down to us the process of collapse. He explains the factors that cause a society to fail. And there are 5 primary reasons according to him. Number 1 is self-inflicted environmental damage. Number 2 is climate change. Number 3, problems with trading partners. Number 4, damage from enemies. And most importantly, the inflexibility of a society's institutions when change is required. So a society afflicted by one or a combination of these factors, he says, will find itself under pressure to survive. And let me speak just a little bit about one of the most popular tourist traps in Central America. That is the ancient abandoned Mayan city of Tikal. Its huge structures, the author says, some of which are over 70 meters high, show that the Mayans must have been supremely powerful and wealthy. But despite all that, their society collapsed. And according to the author, the downfall of that city was self-inflicted. And here's how it happened. The first, it began with a disruption to its food supply. The population grew, and they found it prudent to cut down trees and put all that land under irrigation. But as soon as they did that, they soon found themselves confronting the problem of soil erosion. And that erosion eventually ended up clogging the irrigation systems, which led to droughts which withered the crops. So that was number 1. But the second is that he attributes it to inept leadership. In the moment of crisis, in a moment of overpopulation and food shortages, which required innovative, dramatic leadership, they were simply not able to live up to that crisis, and instead what they ended up doing is placing a bigger priority on building expensive monuments and fighting other countries. And eventually that led to their collapse.
Wow.
I was reading this book, Jem, and I thought to myself, what are the odds that this man is making very blanket statements? But anyway, before I say the reason why I thought like that, let me take you across. Let me take you on the chapter I was doing. Chapter 1, and I call it the failure to adapt by the Vikings. So he tells a story of 2 dairy farms, thousands of miles apart. One is known as Halt's Farm, which is located in a place called Montana in the United States. And one is called Garda Farm. Now, Halt's Farm is thriving. Cattle there, perfect. This Garda Farm became extinct long time ago, 500 years ago. Now, he fears that the success of this Halt's farm could be short-lived. And this is because he draws parallels with the Halt's, what happened to Halt's, the overgrazing, the soil erosion that happened at Garda Farm. All right, and he says that this was self-inflicted environmental damage, and that's why the Vikings vanished and Garda Farm collapsed. Now, I went back because it's such a blanket statement, I think, in my view, to make. So I went and I said, let me just do a little bit of research on this place called Garda. Now, there's a man, an archaeologist called Thomas McGovern, and this is what he said. He said the Vikings were not just dumb. They also had dumb luck. Wow. They discovered Greenland during a time known as the medieval warm period, which lasted from the year 900 to 1300, meaning the entire time it was warm. All right. Sea ice decreased during those centuries, so sailing from Scandinavia to Greenland became less hazardous. Overgrazing led to soil erosion. A lack of wood in Greenland, which is a place has very few trees, led to a lot of soil erosion. And these guys could not actually make boats for them to escape a drought and famine to other places. Now he says, amid that calamity, so the story goes, Greenland's Vikings numbered about 5,000 in their peak, but they never gave up their old ways, and that's why they say they could not adjust. They failed to learn from the Inuit, who arrived in northern Greenland a century or two after the Vikings landed in the south. They kept their livestock, and when their animals starved, so did they. The more flexible Inuit with a culture focused on the hunting marine mammals thrived. But then this guy says they could be a flip. I say, how does an entire people just vanish just like that? All right? And he says, it's scarier, but you can do a lot of things right. You can be highly adaptive, you can be highly flexible, you can be resilient, and you still can go extinct. And according to other ecologists, the plot thickens even more. It may be that Greenland's Vikings didn't vanish, at least not all of them. These guys probably hammered with their boats to other continents.
To warmer places. Wow. Okay, so interesting stuff there too. So Jared proposes that there's a reason why societies collapse, and that failure is located in group decision making. Perhaps what Senate is currently going through.
Yeah.
And he says that there's 4 categories of this. Firstly, a group may fail to anticipate a problem before the problem actually arrives. So they're forecasting not there. Second, when the problem does arrive, the group may fail to perceive it. So it's right in front of you, but you don't know what to do. And then third, after they perceive it, they may even fail to try to solve it. And finally, they may try to solve it, but may not succeed. And that's what he says all those issues come under, these 4 criteria. And he says that we need to find a way for groups to that often make bad decisions to have some sort of checklist. How do we stop making these mistakes? And one of the things he says is writing our histories down. So he gives an example of non-literate societies, such as the Anasazi Society, which is somewhere where New Mexico was located many, many, many years ago. So they survived several droughts before succumbing to one big drought in the 12th century AD. But the earlier droughts had occurred long before the birth of any Anasazi had been affected by that big drought. So they would have been able to anticipate it had someone actually just written down the history of things. But because a lot of these traditions were oral, that got lost in translation, so they succumbed. But he says that modern societies also tend to forget things. So he gives the example of the 1973 Gulf oil crisis, in which Americans shied away in those immediate years from SUV gas guzzlers. And now we've forgotten that crisis that had happened. And then he says another reason why societies fail to anticipate problems involves reasoning by false analogy. Now, he says here, when we are in an unfamiliar situation, we fall back on drawing analogies with old familiar situations. And it's a good way to proceed if the old and new situations are quite similar. But more often than not, the cases are very superficially similar. They're not the same. And so he gives an example of the French military preparations from World War II. Now, the French used their old tactics from World War I, which were very infantry-based, fighting in the trenches, and the Germans decided to try a new tactic. They decided to innovate, use tanks, and to go into areas where previously the French would not have thought their enemy would come from. So famously, the Germans crossed the Maginot Line, which was to guard its eastern frontier, and they used tanks to go and beat the French, and they beat the French in 6 weeks. And so he says that the French generals had made a common mistake. The generals often plan for a coming war as if it will be like the previous war, especially if the previous war was one in which you were victorious. So the French were victorious before, they thought they'll be victorious again. So on a day, guys, where we had a winning headline from the Standard and a winning cartoon from the Star, I want to leave you with this. Thank you. History, as well as life itself, is complicated. Neither life nor history is an enterprise for those who seek simplicity and consistency. Have yourself a lovely evening. Please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, but find us on TV. We're on GoTV, Time for to Air.